today's webinar. We're going to go ahead and get started. I am your presenter, Joe Crable. I'm a solution architect here at PTS, and today we're going to be talking about calculations and parsing with TracerPlus. So some of the things I'll be talking about today and actually demonstrating is numeric calculations. So that would be adding, subtracting, multiplying, or dividing between fields, up to 10 fields, as well as being able to do that with constant values as well. I'll also show string concatenation, where you can take 2 or more fields and concatenate them together to form a single string. So I'll show you some cases where that may be useful to you. The next thing I'm going to go over is barcode parsing or data parsing. So picture scanning a large barcode that contains multiple pieces of information. So you'll be able to parse that out into different fields based on parse settings. I'll talk a little bit about GPS and how that's set up. We probably won't show much on that since we can't really get a signal inside our building here. And then lastly, we'll demonstrate some apps that show how calculations are used within lookup fields. I do want to mention, if you have any questions at any time during the webinar, if you could type them into your question panel within the GoToWebinar area. We will address all these questions at the end. So if you could just type those in as you have questions. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started here. Let me exit the PowerPoint. So if I bring up TracerPlus Desktop, I'm going to start a new project from scratch here to show you some of these calculations. So I'm going to click New Project. I'm going to highlight our session 1, and the first thing I'm going to show you today is those numeric calculations with the addition, subtraction, multiply, and divide. So I'm just going to create a simple form here just to show you how those work. So first we'll actually jump over to the calculation settings. So to set a calculated field, you would set a field type of calculated. Once you do that, you'll notice a Calculated Options tab appear up top. So if I click that, we're presented with all of our calculated options. So we have a function here. So this is a type of calculation function that you're looking to do. As you can see here, we have add, subtract, multiply, divide. We have a modulus calculation, a min and max. Our left, mid, and right, that's our parsing feature. And then we have our GPS latitude, longitude, and newly added in 8, I believe, was altitude. So we have the concept of these functions here, or operators. And then down here is a result. So this is where you would add your fields or constant values that you want to include in this calculation. We sometimes call those operands. So that's how I'm going to name my fields here. So we'll make this op1 for operand 1. We'll make field 2 operand 2. And then field 3, let's do a field 1 plus field 2. Field 4 will be our third operand. Then maybe we want to take field 4 and subtract it from field 3. Field 6, maybe we want to take field 5 and actually multiply that by a constant value of 50. So I'm just naming these fields just so we know the type of calculation we're doing. This is, not something you would likely do. This is strictly for demonstration purposes to show you what field's doing what. Field 7, that can be our fourth operand, and then field 8 will do field 6 divided by field 7. You'll notice a data type setting here. So this is used in calculations, and it's particularly important for the add function. since that actually supports two different types of additions, one being the numeric addition and the other being the string concatenation. So because we made this field 1 plus field 2, I'm actually going to have to set this data type to number so that it knows to add those two together. If I left that as a field type of general, it would actually do a string concatenation and put those two fields together. So if I did 10 plus 20, instead of getting a result of 30, we would get a value of 10, 20. But since all the other functions don't have a dual purpose like the addition, once you set those, it'll automatically set its data type correctly. So since we're adding field 1 plus field 2 here, we're going to select our op1. Then we click Insert, so that'll insert it into our calc result. And then we'll also set op2. This is going to add our op1 and op2 field and display the result in this field 3. So once again, we jump back to general. We are on number. So next is our subtract. So if we jump over, actually we'll set this to calculated. And then we'll set our function to subtract. And we'll do the same thing. We're subtracting field 4 from field 3. So our field 4 is op3. So we'll click that and insert. Then our field 3 is our F1 plus F2. So that's what we're going to select from this drop down here and insert that. So it's now going to subtract those two fields and display the result in this field. Since we did select subtract, our data type automatically changed to number for us, which is what I was explaining before. The only one you'll have to manually change is that addition function. So for our multiplication, we'll select calculated, choose multiply, and choose our field 5, which is our F4 minus F3. Insert that. And now since we're multiplying this times a constant, we can actually highlight this drop-down, type in any value we want, so in this case 50, and then I'll click Insert. Now that constant value will be included in our calculation. Now we'll jump down to our last calculated field here, select the divide function, and we're going to divide field 6 by 7, which is our F5 times 50, and our op4. You can actually clear the constants of your result by clicking this Clear All button if you wanted to start over. Or you can actually right-click one of the operators in here and click Remove if you wanted to modify that calc. You'll also notice that the result displays in this little result box up here. So it's telling you what the actual calculation is going to do. And down here at the bottom, we have a few formatting options. So you'll see we have a decimal places, which you can go up to 6 places. Since we're doing a division, I'll just go out to 2 places. And then if you check this currency box, it will actually display a $ in your fields. All right, so now we should be complete with our setup. We have our form built, so now I'm going to push this over to our device. And I'll just pull up my device here. So that's going to automatically close TracerPlus, push over the project, and when it's finished, it's going to reopen TracerPlus for us. So if we go into session 1 where we have our calculations defined, you'll see that all of our calc fields are defaulting to 0 since we haven't done any calcs yet or entered any operands. So the first thing I'm going to do is enter a value of 10 to our first field and then 20 to our next one. So you'll see that our F1 plus F2 added those two together. Now we're going to subtract the value that we're entering here from that 30. So let's enter 70. We should end up with 40. So then field 5 is now taking this value of 40 and multiplying it by 50, which gives us a value of 2,000. So then we're going to divide that by our opt-for field here. So if I were to enter 50, we will get a value of 40. Since we divided 2,000 by 50, and since we specified that 2 decimal places, it's actually going to display the .00 there. That's how easy it is to set up a mathematical calculation, and you'll kind of see how calculations can kind of work with each other. And you can actually also include up to 10 operands in that calculation. So if we jump back over to our calc settings here, you could add up to 10 fields within a single field. So if you're looking to do some sort of summing of multiple fields, you could actually add up to 10 fields within this. So the next thing I want to talk about is our string concatenation. So let me create another session here. So there's a few ways you could use a string concatenation. One could possibly be to generate a unique ID. So maybe you have a part number and a serial number. So the part number would most likely be duplicated, but the serial number is usually unique. So we'll create a field called UID, which will stand for unique ID. So maybe we want to take our part number and serial number, put them together to form a unique identifier. So once again, we'll set our UID to calculated. Jump over to our calculated options. The function should be add. And just like we did with the number calculation, we're going to add the field that we want to include in this calculation. So it'll be our part number and our serial number. So now, since we're leaving this data type as general, instead of trying to do a mathematical calculation, it's going to put these two strings together to form one longer string. And we can actually turn on validation for this for unique and table. And then I can actually remove some of these fields here and create our form. And we'll push this over to our device. Okay. So now we'll jump into our second session here. So now if I were to enter, let's say, part number 1111 for the serial number of 12345, you'll see that it'll put those two together as a string. So I could actually submit that, and I could do the same part number. Then maybe this time it's 23456. And we should also be able to submit that, because those are two unique IDs now. So if I were to actually scan the same thing again, let's say that, and then our 12345, which is our first one, and if I try to submit that, we should get a unique and table violation. So I don't know if you heard that sound, but that was our validation failure saying that the data must be unique. So that's one way to also prevent duplicate parts and serial numbers from being scanned, or basically to make sure that you've already scanned that item, so you want to prevent the user from scanning it again. So that's one use for our string concatenation. Another use could be if you're using multiple tabs. So let me create another session here. So let's say we have a part number, a description, but then maybe we want to display this part number on another tab. We'll call this display part number. And we'll remove all these other fields here. So our display part number, this will be our calculated fields. Once again, our data type of general with our function of add. So we'll just go ahead and take our original part number that we're scanning and insert that here. Since TracerPlus doesn't support the use of the same fields more than once on a form, this is how you can get around that. And we can actually display this part number in a different section of our form. So now if I go ahead and create a default form, and if I were to create a separate tab here, so we have a second page to our form, and if I were just to cut and paste this display part number over to our form, and we could even get a little fancy here and delete our field control, and actually display our part number as our label here. So we just set a data-driven label for our display part number. So now once I enter a part number to this field, and if I were to go to that second page, we should then see that part number here as well. Let me push this over to my device and show you how that works. Another good use for string concatenations, which I'm not going to show today, is if maybe you're looking to do some sort of auto number, a unique numbering scheme, but our auto number fields don't support letters. So if you wanted to make something start at A1001, you could take an auto number field starting at 1001, and then actually have a separate field that will actually add an A to the beginning of that string, and that will update every time that that auto number increases. So that's another use for the string concatenation. All right, so if we go to our session 3, if I were to enter our part number here, let's say 54123, we don't really need a description here, but if I were to jump right over to page 2, you'll see that that same part number is displaying in that label that we created. So this is a nice way to actually display information that's already been entered to the user that may be useful in other steps of their data collection process. So that's all I wanted to cover on the string concatenation part of this webinar. So now if we just jump back over to our field settings here, I want to talk about some of the other calculation settings before we move on. So some of the other functions we have is a modulus, which is basically going to take the remainder of 2 fields. So if you divide, let's say, 10 by 4, that's going to leave you a remainder of 2. So that's what your modulus value is going to be, that value of 2. We've actually used this for resetting counter fields. And that's probably one of the main reasons it was added. But I'm not going to go too into depth on that feature. We also have a min and max setting. So this will be able to take, so if I were to set this to min, I could add, however many fields up to 10 in here. And out of all the values that were entered to those fields, it will give me the lowest or minimum value of all those fields. The same can be said about the max. Instead of giving me the minimum value, it will give me the maximum or highest value of all the fields in that calculation. As I mentioned before, we also have some GPS, or this is where you would actually set GPS fields. You would just simply set it to GPS latitude, and you'll notice that no other options are needed to be configured. If your device supports GPS, it should just be able to capture those coordinates. So you would set 3 fields, one for latitude, one for longitude. If you did want altitude, you would set that 3rd field to altitude. And like I said, if your device supports it, you should be able to capture all those coordinates. All right, so now we're going to go into our parsing function. So I'm going to create another session here. So field 1 we'll call our barcode fields. Field 2, we're going to do a left parse of the first 3 characters of our barcode field. So I'll call this left 3. In field 3, maybe we want to do a parse of the middle 3 characters of our barcode. So I'll just call this mid 3. In field 4, we want to do a right parse of our last 3 characters. So we'll call this right 3. So what we'll do is first we'll go to left 3, set this as a calculated. And for this function, since we're going from the left of the barcode, we just want to go 3 in from the left. We want to set this to a function of left. Our source field is where we're going to be getting that data from, so that's going to be our barcode field. And then we do have 2 different types of parsing, one being index, one being char. I'll show you char right after this, but for this purpose, we're doing index. So if we enter 3, that's going to start at the left of the barcode, go 3 positions, and then return that into this field. So for our mid, same thing. We're going to set as calculated. Our function is going to be mid. So since we're doing a mid parse, we're basically going from a start point to a stop point. So that's why we have these 2 settings here. So first we'll select our source field, which will be barcode. Our start index, since we want to grab our middle 3, we're going to start from our 4th position and then go 3 positions. And then finally, our right is going to be our right function based on the barcode fields, and once again, an index of 3. I'll go ahead and build my form here, and we'll push this out to the device. So index parsing is good to be used if you have a barcode that's always going to be a set length, and then each section of that barcode is always a set length. So that would be a good use for an index type parse. All right, so if I go to session 4, if I enter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, we should see that 1, 2, 3 ends up in our left 3, 4, 5, 6 should end up in our mid 3, and 7, 8, 9 should end up in our right 3. So if I hit enter, that's exactly what we see here. If the string were any longer, obviously this parse would change as far as the right function goes, because it's always grabbing the 3 from the right. So since I just added those 1, 1, 1, that's why it's grabbing the 1, 1, 1. So next thing I want to talk about is our character or char parsing. So I'm actually just going to modify what I have here and use a real-world example. Maybe you're scanning someone's ID. So say they have an ID number, and you have a first name and a last name. So our ID number, it's going to be our leftmost in the barcode. So once again, we'll stick with left, but this time I'll change it to char. So now we're looking for a character within that barcode to parse from. We sometimes also call this a delimiter, which people commonly use carriage returns, tab characters, line feeds, or actual physical characters like a pipe or a comma or a dash. In this case, I'm just going to use a pipe character. So I'm going to enter that to our value field. And then we can also choose the occurrence. So if everything's delimited by this pipe character, you're going to have more than one occurrence of this particular character. So that's where this occurrence comes in. And you'll see that for our mid setting here. So our char is going to be from the first pipe character we find to the second occurrence of this pipe character. So we just up that value to 2. So that's going to grab the data between the first and second pipe in our barcode string. Lastly, we'll change our right from our pipe character. And this goes from, the occurrence is actually from the left to the right in the barcode. So if you're wanting to parse from that second pipe character in the barcode, it's actually going to be the second occurrence because we're going from the left to the right. So I'm just going to push that out. Okay. And we're just going to open our session 4. So picture scanning a barcode that contains a user's ID, first name, last name. So let's say 1001, pipe, Joseph, pipe, Crable. Oop, that's not a pipe. So now once I hit enter, it should put, actually one thing I should have done was rebuild my form just so it shows you the actual field names. But if I hit enter, we have our ID number of 1001. We have our first name of Joseph and our last name of Crable. So that's a good use for barcode parsing. A lot of times it's also used for scanning driver's licenses since that contains a lot of information. You can actually parse that information out into a bunch of different fields. There is one more thing I wanted to show you with the parsing. It's called dynamic parsing. So I'm going to add a 5th session here. And I'm going to add a value field, a scan field. And let's say we're going to do a left parse. So a dynamic parse is actually a parse that can be controlled by different data presented on the form. So picture, we actually do have a customer that's scanning meat products that come in from a bunch of different suppliers. So they're using those supplier barcodes, but all those suppliers have different delimiters and a little different formats and lengths. So by selecting a supplier from a drop-down, we're able to then control how that barcode is parsed based on parameters for that supplier. So that's where that dynamic parsing comes into play. So I'm just going to show you a basic example of this by entering a value into our value field here, and then based on that, it's going to parse out a certain part of our string. So we want to go to our left parse, set that to calculated, set this to left. Everything's the same. We set this to the field that we're scanning into, so that'll be our scan field. And then we want to go from a char. We could actually do an index as well, but I'll go from a char here. So we do have a value drop down here, which I didn't talk about. So we do have some common delimiters in there, as I mentioned. But you can actually pick a field in your session that actually contains this dynamic parse data. So if I select field 1, you'll see that it gets a value of 0, which is a 0-based index for the fields. So now I'm just going to push this out to my device. So if I enter a value of A here, and I enter a string of 1, 2, 3, A, 4, 5, 6, B, 7, 8, 9, C, 1, 1, 1. So since I entered A in this value, it's going to do a left parse from A. Now if I were to change this to B, we should actually get 1, 2, 3, A, 4, 5, 6. So I change that to B. That's exactly what we get. If I change this to C, then we get the entire string left of the C. So you'll see how the parsing can actually change based on field values. So picture, instead of actually entering a value, that this value can be looked up based on some other selection in your form, such as I mentioned before with the supplier. So that's all I wanted to cover today on the parsing. So the last part I want to show is a few examples using calculated fields with lookups. So I'm actually going to grab some projects from our Solution Center. So these are free to use. You can also grab these projects yourself, use them as is, or modify it to your liking. So I'm going to go to our samples. First one I want to show is an inventory issue and receive. So this is going to be able to receive an issue inventory and update a quantity on hand in our master inventory list. And to do this, we use a combination of lookups and calc fields. I'm just going to import that. Okay, so you'll see we have 3 sessions here. We have a receive product, issue product, and view product list. We can just take a quick look at the forms. You'll see what they look like. So I'm just going to push these right over to the device. And once I push these over, I'm just going to key in some data into our inventory list here. So we'll go over to my product list, select the location. Let's choose stockroom 1. We'll say part number 123123. Description, we'll say men's polo. And let's say quantity on hand, we start with 10. So that's going to auto-submit for us. So let's do, say, women's slacks. And we'll do a quantity of 15. And then maybe we want to do stockroom 2. We'll also do our 123123 part in that. Our men's polo. And let's say we have 5 in stockroom 2. So now if we just look at our product lists, we should see what's in inventory here. So our stockroom 1, our part, and what we currently have on hand here. So now let's say we want to receive some items to inventory, so we go to our received product. We scan our barcode here. It's going to look up our description of men's polo. We choose the stockroom we want to receive to, so in this case we'll choose stockroom 1. We'll see that we already have 10 on hand, so maybe we want to receive 25. And then save that. So we should end up with a value of 35 now. So if I were to enter that again and choose stockroom 1, you'll see that our quantity on hand is now 35. If I switch to stockroom 2, we had 5, I believe. So we can actually add 15 to that. And if we save that, we should end up with 20. So if we jump back over to our view data and our product list, we'll see that those quantities have now been updated. Here's our part from 35, and here's our other one that's now 20. The same concept applies to our issue products. Instead of actually adding to the quantity, we're actually going to remove it from inventory. So if we scan our 123123, choose stockroom 1, which has 35. Let's go ahead and issue 17. So that should leave us with 18. And let's scan our women's slacks here. Geez, if I could type. And we'll choose from stockroom 1. And we'll issue 4, so we should have 11 left. And if we go to our product list again, so here we have 11, and then we have our 18. So now what you're wondering is, how did we do all this? So if we jump over to our receive product session and jump over to the field settings, so the first thing we did, we actually have a lookup quantity here, which is actually updating our source session. So first we have our quantity on hand, which we're looking up based on our part number and our location. We have our quantity to receive, which is what we were entering. So we're basically going to take these 2 fields, add them together, and then looking to update that quantity on hand fields in our inventory session or our view product list session. So we first do that by enabling a lookup to that view product list based on our part number and location. And the source field we want to grab is our quantity on hand. But the one additional thing we're doing here is the update source. So that means whenever we submit this local record, it's going to update our source session with whatever value ends up in this field. So the way we get the quantity on hand plus the received to this field is by doing a calculation. So if we jump over to our calculated options, we're taking our quantity on hand field, adding it to our quantity received field. So that's how that works. We're adding the two fields together. When the record's submitting, we're updating that source row in that view product list with that new quantity on hand. Same goes for our issue product. We're doing the exact same thing, except instead of adding these two fields, we're subtracting them. So that's how you can take a calculated field and use it with a lookup to update quantity information. The last sample I want to show is an asset location audit. So I'm going to jump back to our samples, grab our asset location audit, and we're going to import this. So if we look at our scan assets, this actually has a grid. So in this case, the calculated field is actually being used to update. We're doing a string concatenation to update a status field in our asset lists, which then enables us to remove the value from the grid based on a filter. So first, I'm just going to show you it working. I'm just going to deploy this. And I'm also going to use our Connect product here to just quickly get some data up to our device. So I'm just going to create a new Connect project. I'm going to create a sync profile based on my asset location audit, or I believe it's called assets in a room. And I'm just going to take the data from, we actually include a sample database for this particular sample session. So if you choose our TracerPlus Connect sample, and then our asset list, then our destination, we want to sync this to our asset list as well. And then we want to make sure our mappings line up correctly. So I'm just going to save this. Save this test. And we'll just overwrite that. So if I jump over to my data viewer, you'll see some assets here in particular locations. So this is what I want to sync over to our device. So if we look at our asset list, we just need to clear out what we were entering before. And we'll clear the first session here. So now I should be able to sync this data over to my device. You'll see our 16 records are going over. Now I should have our 16 assets. Here's our asset ID, our room locations. You'll see that nothing's been scanned yet. So if I jump into our scan assets and select a room here, we should see a grid filtered of all the assets that are expected within that room. So as you start scanning assets, they're going to get removed from the grid. You'll see 1001 was removed. 1002 is now removed. So I'm doing a scan, it's auto-submitting, and it's removing from the grid. And finally, the last one. So now we know that all assets have been found. We can check off our all assets found and hit submit. If we wanted to, we could go on to the next room. That's going to show the expected assets in that one. So we scan 1006. And maybe that's all we see in the room, so we actually comment that 1005 was not found, and then submit that. So if we jump over to our view data, the way that grid was updating is that we were updating a status field in this asset list. So you'll see as assets were scanned, we're giving them a scan date, and then also a status of found. So if we look at how we did that, once again, we used the calculation field for updating the status and the date. So first we did a lookup in our asset list based on our location and asset ID with our source field of status And once again, we have that update source checked off so that when we submit this local record, it updates that row and that field in that asset list session. If we look at the actual calculated field, we're just taking our status field and concatenating it to our update status field. So our status field is just being a default value of found that's not visible to the user, so that every time something's scanned, it gets this found value appended to it. So for the update date, we're updating when this asset was scanned. So the same thing, we're looking in our asset list based on our location and asset ID. This time we're returning our scan date, but we have our update source field checked. And our calculated field is getting the date value from our scan date field, which is field 4. So that's just a date stamp that's automatically generated. So we're taking the value from that date, concatenating it to our update date calc, and then it's updating that row in our source session once the record's submitted. So that's pretty much what I wanted to show you today. I want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us today, and enjoy the rest of your day.